As the biggest wrestling company in the world, World Wrestling Entertainment produces hundreds of televised matches per year and have tens of thousands of them either readily available via the WWE Network, YouTube, and home media releases, with a great many more stored away in their vault until they're ready, or in some cases not ready, to see the light of day. Fire up the network now and you will be spoiled for choice when it comes to what matches, or full shows you're able to watch at your leisure. And while every match has its merits, I suppose, if you're a WWE fan, hell, even if you're not a WWE fan in some cases, there are some matches that you should watch at least once. Looking back through the decades, we here at Cultaholic Wrestling have chosen 101 matches that are either brilliant, fun, historic, controversial, business-changing, or otherwise stand out as significant in some form or fashion. Perhaps they just tell a brilliant story and made us, as fans, feel something more than other matches. Now, it is important to state right from the jump that this is not the 101 best WWE matches ever, and they're not ranked in any particular order. This is more like a smorgasbord of superior sports entertainment for you to snack on, and then invariably shout at me over the internet about. If you are a long-term WWE superfan and you're currently watching a Cultaholic Wrestling YouTube video, so the odds of that are fairly high, then you may have seen some, most, or even all of the matches included here. But you know what? We might just surprise you. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 101 WWE matches everyone should watch at least once. Join us.
But before we start, today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. We at Cultaholic truly believe that Nord is the best service of its kind. Firstly, it's super easy to use. Connect with one click or enable auto-connect for zero-click protection. There are over 5,300 servers in 60 different countries, which is a hell of a lot. It has amazing speed, confirmed by the speed tests. NordVPN is the fastest service out there, and it's on every major platform. So here's how I use Nord. Obviously, I live in the United Kingdom, but with NordVPN, I can set myself to be anywhere in the world virtually and access content from those regions. So this means, if I fancied it, I could set myself to be somewhere in the world virtually and sign up for a certain sports entertainment network for a fraction of the price. Or if I happen to live in the United States, I could sign up for that sports entertainment network, even though it doesn't properly exist as it did in the United States before. Oh, and it works on lots of other on-demand services too. Nord costs the equivalent of a cup of fancy coffee every month, a small price to pay for complete peace of mind when it comes to cybersecurity and access to a whole range of entertaining content. Also, there's even a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if Nord isn't for you, you can get your money back, no bother at all. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/Cultaholic, a link's in the description below, to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus an additional 4 months for free. And remember, it's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks for watching, enjoy the video.
Number 101, Bret Hart vs. the 1-2-3 Kid on Raw. Back in 1994, it was practically unheard of to see a long WWE title match on free television, especially one between two babyfaces. Bret Hart and the 1-2-3 Kid had one of the best televised matches in WWE history to kick off the July 11th, 1994 episode of the company's flagship show, the two telling a simple yet compelling story of the Kid valiantly trying to stay in the hunt and cause a huge upset against the Hitman, despite being outmatched when it came to size, experience, and technique. The work was exceptional, the crowd were well into it, and by the end you genuinely believed that the impossible might just happen. It wasn't the Kid's night on this night, but losing this match did more for him in his career than winning 10 or 20 other matches would have done. Perhaps the first truly great match in Raw's history, it still holds up and, in fact, somehow feels even more remarkable level close to 30 years later. Number 100, Brock Lesnar vs. John Cena at Extreme Rules 2012. Brock Lesnar's first WWE match in 8 years was unlike anything fans had seen before. The next big thing was hot off his record-breaking UFC run and brought a heightened sense of realism that certainly jarred next to WWE's hand-picked PG poster boy, John Cena. This Extreme Rules scrap from 2012's namesake pay-per-view was brutal, with Brock dismantling Cena in variously grisly but entertaining ways. You know when people talk about when a car crash happens in front of you, and even though you shouldn't watch, you can't bring yourself to look away? Yeah, that. Fans have argued about the end result since it happened, but if you're going into the match cold and without context for what was going on at the time, you will no doubt get sucked into the drama of it all. Plus, it's not every day you see two stars of this magnitude go at it as ferociously as these two did on this particular night. Number 99, DX and the Radicals versus The Rock, Cactus Jack, Too Cool and Rikishi on Raw. In professional wrestling, a crowd can really help make a match. A hot crowd can make a so-so bout seem like a decent bout feel like a great one, and a great one feel like an all-timer. There aren't many crowds in WWE history as hot as the one on hand in Dallas for the February 7th, 2000 edition of Raw. Those in Reunion Arena that night made the show's main event seem even better than it was, and it was still pretty friggin' good regardless. During this time, WWE were firing on all cylinders, and everyone in the match was either over or on their way to getting over. The crowd were on fire for everything, and the match itself is really fun, capped off with a frenetic post-match scene that is worth sticking around for. Number 98, The Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25. Two of the greatest performers in the history of WrestleMania finally collided on the big stage in 2009, producing an instant classic that is regarded as one of the best matches not only in the history of the granddaddy of them all, but in WWE history itself. By this point, the Dead Man and the Heartbreak Kid were battle-hardened veterans who knew exactly how to manipulate the audience's emotion, so giving them 30 minutes to work their magic on the grandest stage of them all pretty much guaranteed that they would produce something extra special. Two well-defined characters giving it their all at the biggest show of the year with major stakes, the streak on the line. What is not to love? With no title at stake, the streak was the story, and Michaels and Taker skillfully played with the crowd's expectations, with one unplanned moment when the Phenom landed on his head from an over-the-top rope dive, adding some genuine urgency. WWE's only mistake was not having this match close the show, because neither world title match could possibly follow it. Number 97, Shane McMahon vs. Mr. McMahon at WrestleMania X7. WrestleMania is as much about pomp and pageantry and sports entertainment as it is about, well, you know, actual wrestling. And who gets sports entertainment more than the McMahon family themselves? Their psychodrama played out wonderfully at WrestleMania X7 as Father Vince battled son Shane in a street fight with plenty of extras, including Mick Foley as the special guest ref, and a mid-match catfight between Trish Stratus and Stephanie McMahon after Trish got her sweet revenge on the genetic jackhammer. Speaking of revenge, anytime the simple act of someone standing up from a chair can make 67,000 odd people lose their minds, you know you've done something right. There were a few McMahon vs. McMahon matches, or matches that involved McMahon infighting, but this is the peak, as everything paid off just at the right moment. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't meant to be, but it did everything it was supposed to. And if you can't enjoy watching Vince McMahon get a trash can kicked into his face, then there's something wrong with you. Number 96, the Hardy Boys vs. the Dudley Boys vs. Edge and Christian at SummerSlam 2000. Before these three teams came along and changed the game, tag team wrestling was low priority stuff as far as those behind the scenes in WWE were concerned. And boy, how Edge and Christian, the Hardys and the Dudleys changed all of that. A spectacular stunt show that really set a dangerous precedent going forward. This was 6 guys going out and doing everything in their power to steal the show. They'd previously made magic at WrestleMania 2000 with a triangle ladder match, but upped the ante here by adding tables and chairs into the mix too. Even watching it over 2 decades later, with everything that's happened in the wrestling business since, it takes your breath away due to the creativity, inventiveness, and sheer danger on display. Even non-fans would be hard-pressed not to be taken aback by what they were seeing in real time, with no second takes and no Hollywood crash pads to cushion anyone's fall. Number 95, Steve Austin vs. Dude Love at Over the Edge 1998. The rise and eventual coronation of Stone Cold Steve Austin was a sight to behold, as the Texas Rattlesnake took the industry by storm en route to winning his first WWE title in the main event of WrestleMania 14. His first major feud was against Mick Foley's alter ego, Dude Love, though really it had just as much, if not more, to do with his bitter rivalry with Mr. McMahon. Austin and Love headlined the Over the Edge pay-per-view, giving us a far more enjoyable sequel to their Unforgiven effort the month prior. What sets this apart was not just the increased quality of the action, but also the added sizzle of having Falls Count Anywhere stipulations, McMahon as a guest referee, Stooges Gerald Briscoe and Pat Patterson as guest timekeeper and guest ring announcer respectively, as well as The Undertaker stationed as guest ringside enforcer. Ridiculously fun stuff, with everyone playing their parts perfectly. This really is the best that the much vaunted Attitude Era had to offer. Number 94, Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit vs. Edge and Rey Mysterio at No Mercy 2002. 2002 saw WWE introduce their brand split in a bid to essentially create competition within the company. One of the positive consequences of the split initially was the formation of the so-called SmackDown 6, who helped make the blue brand the must-watch show for fans who favored superior wrestling. 4 of the 6 were at their very best at No Mercy, where they clashed in a tournament final to crown the first SmackDown exclusive tag team champions. The quartet of young and hungry athletes vying to establish themselves as stars let it all hang out with a barn burner that stood as WWE's best match of the year, at least as far as pure in-ring work goes. What makes it so enjoyable is the melding of styles, with Rey's lucha offense contrasting nicely with the amateur exploits of Angle and Benoit's full-throttle ultra-intense approach, while Edge played the fiery babyface to a T. Still one of the best tag matches in WWE history, and a look at 4 tremendous pros at the peak of their powers. Number 93, Paul Orndorff vs. Hulk Hogan at the big event. Wrestling is arguably at its best when it's at its simplest. Good, bad, black, white, hero, villain. There weren't exactly too many shades of grey in the 1980s when the red and yellow of Hulkamania reigned supreme, and Hulk Hogan, under the watchful eye of Vince McMahon, transformed the business into a pop culture phenomenon. Like all good protagonists, the Hulkster needed an effective antagonist, or series of them, to go up against, with one of his most effective adversaries coming in the form of Paul Orndorff, who had been teaming with Hogan before growing jealous of his success and turning on him. Hulk and Mr. Wonderful were a huge box office attraction whenever they went up against one another, with their match at the big event, a non-pay-per-view show that attracted over 60,000 fans to Toronto's Exhibition Stadium, being one of the key battles in their feud. They didn't do anything fancy, sticking to a formula that they knew worked, but the massive crowd ate it and the ringside theatrics of Bobby the Brain Heenan up with a spoon, leading to months of sellouts around the country. Number 92, Bianca Belair vs. Sasha Banks at WrestleMania 37. Female performers first received the opportunity to main event WrestleMania in 2019, with Becky Lynch, Ronda Rousey, and Charlotte Flair colliding in a winner-takes-all triple threat match with both the Raw and SmackDown women's titles on the line. The match was no doubt historic and worth a watch, even if it doesn't appear on this list, but it pales in comparison to the awesome Sasha Banks vs. Bianca Belair bout from 2 years later. Closing out night 1, the Boss and the EST of WWE had the first singles women's WrestleMania main event, which was also historic because it was the first time African American women had been in the picture. Not only that, but the first night of WrestleMania 37 was the first time WWE had performed in front of a paying audience in over a year due to the global pandemic. You could see the emotion written over both competitors' faces as they knew that they were about to tear the house down in extraordinary circumstances, which they did, and then some. Number 91, The Shield vs. Cody Rhodes and Goldust at Battleground 2013. At its core, professional wrestling is about and thrives off emotion. It's the matches that make us feel something above all others that keep us hooked, with effective storylines and stipulations helping significantly in this respect. One of the big go-to pro wrestling tropes since Austin vs. McMahon helped the company reach the stock market is the everyman versus authority angle. It has been deployed often and to decidedly mixed results, with one of its best uses coming in 2013 as the Rhodes family waged war with the Authority. It all led to Battleground, where Cody and Goldust took on the Shield's Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns with their and their father Dusty's jobs on the line. The match itself was nothing groundbreaking in terms of the dynamics at play or the structure, but everyone worked it expertly, with the crowd responding to the escalating drama as they passionately cheered on the Rhodes boys. And it all built to one of the best feel-good moments in recent memory. Number 90, Triple H vs. Cactus Jack at Royal Rumble 2000. And now we hit our second of Foley's three faces, as Cactus Jack was brought back for St. Mick's exceptional send-off feud with Triple H. The game had established himself as one of the top guys in the industry, but he was yet to have a genuinely classic match while a member of the Main Eventers Club. But that all changed with his WWE title street fight against Cactus at the 2000 Royal Rumble. Foley himself felt the need to prove himself all over again after his performances had diminished in quality over the previous months due to a laundry list of debilitating injuries. He and Hunter captivated an enthused Madison Square Garden crowd on the night with a match that enhanced Foley's legacy while establishing Triple H as the man, kicking off a banner year for the Cerebral Assassin. It's not for the squeamish mind, with Foley taking a sickening face-first bump into a pile of thumbtacks for the finish, but they didn't overdo it either, the violence and blood fitting with the storyline, setting, and stakes. Number 89, Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch versus the Briscoe brothers in MSG. One legendary tag team that really doesn't get its due these days, no thanks to you damn pesky millennials, is the team of Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch. The North-South Connection were former WWE Tag Team Champions and had many memorable bouts in both Japan and WWE, including this one against Jack and Jerry Briscoe in the final days of 1984. A tale of real contrasts, the Briscoe brothers were technically sound, rule-abiding good guys, while the champs were brawling, rule-breaker scumbags. The teams meshed brilliantly in a near half-hour blinder that requires patience but is so worth the investment. Dirty Dick in particular is on another level here with his facial expressions, wild bumping, and overall shenanigans, as he and adorable Adrian put on a great show opposite the understated former NWA standouts. There's great wrestling, brawling, character work, and a structure and pace different to just about any other tag match that you're bound to see. The MSG crowd showed their appreciation for the four pros, realizing that they were watching something special, even if the double count-out finish is a little anticlimactic. Number 88, Bret Hart vs. Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam 1991. It's heartening, pun slightly intended here, when you see a star born right before your very eyes. Not that Bret Hart wasn't a star yet, but he was in the middle of trying to establish himself as a singles performer after many successful years tagging with Jim Neidhart as the Hart Foundation. Booked against Kurt Mr. Perfect Hennig for the Intercontinental title at SummerSlam 1991, the excellence of execution announced himself in the world's most famous arena, capturing his first major singles title in a textbook wrestling match. Not only was Hennig unselfish in letting the Hitman kick out of his Perfect Plex finisher, the very fact that Kurt even made it to the ring that night is something of a miracle, as his back was wrecked and he would in fact take 15 months off to recover immediately after. It was a star-making performance from Bret, who would go from strength to strength over the course of the next year or so on his way to winning the big one. Number 87, Sergeant Slaughter vs. the Iron Sheik in MSG. To a newer generation of WWE fans, Sergeant Slaughter and the Iron Sheik are two figures to poke fun at, anachronistic representations of a cartoonish bygone era who some feel look silly living the gimmick many moons later. Well, let me tell you right now, appearances can be deceiving, and there was nothing cartoonish or silly about the bloody boot camp match the two men had in MSG on June 16th, 1984. This was a war. Not so much a wrestling match as a wild and bloody fight to the death. Sheik and Sarge blew off their legendary feud, American Super Patriot versus Evil Foreign Menace works every time, in epic style. Anyone who thinks of Sheiky Baby as a make-believe Twitter jokester or sees Sarge as that old bloke who comes out to get beaten up by the Rusevs and Jack Swaggers of the world really ought to educate themselves on what special talents they were in their heyday. And this match would be the place to start. Number 86, The Rock vs. Mankind on Raw. And now we get to the third of Foley's three faces, with his maiden WWE title win as Mankind on the January 4th, 1999 episode of Raw. It was a significant day not only in Foley's career, but in the Monday Night War between WWE and WCW. Raw was pre-taped that night as opposed to the live Nitro, with Eric Bischoff and company doing their best to put a dampener on Foley's big moments by having commentator Tony Schiavone spoil the result, sarcastically adding that him being champ ought to put a lot of butts in seats. It was Foley and WWE who had the last laugh though, as hundreds of thousands of people changed the channel in order to see the switch. And what a moment it was! The match itself wasn't anything to necessarily write home about, but people fondly remember it for Foley getting his much-deserved win, the brawl between DX and the Corporation, and the earth-shattering pop Stone Cold Steve Austin received for his entrance and assist. Number 85, The Ultimate Warrior vs. Randy Savage at WrestleMania 7. One of the big things that attracts people to professional wrestling, and WWE specifically, is the larger-than-life characters that populate its roster. And do they come much larger than life than The Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage? I mean, holy Technicolor Dreamcoat, McMahon. Jim Hellwig wasn't noted for his in-ring savvy and rarely had what you would call a great match, but the meticulous Macho Man, who was a stickler for details and planned his biggest matches out very carefully, carried him to, perhaps, his best ever in-ring showing. Warrior and Savage met at WrestleMania 7 in a retirement match. With Randy leading the way and mapping out a roller coaster ride of emotions, Warrior was able to go far longer and dig a lot deeper than he was usually required to. This was a shining example of what WWE does best, with two well-defined and colourful personalities having a classic match at WWE's signature event. The post-match theatrics with Queen Sherry and Miss Elizabeth put a beautiful bow on it after all was said and done. Number 84, WLC at Extreme Rules 2014. Now this right here is what in wrestling is usually dubbed an attraction. WLC was TLC, but for, that's right, little or wee people, namely Hornswoggle and El Torito. Despite being shunted onto the Extreme Rules 2014 pre-show, WWE spared no expense when it came to presenting this incredibly unique match, bringing out a scaled-down ring announcer, referee, and commentators, WeBL, Micro Cole, and Jerry Smaller, thank you very much, as well as providing mini weapons. Much of it was played for laughs, but the two men in the match, as well as Los Matadores and 3MB at ringside, put in one hell of a shift and took a lot of risks to get the thing over. And the crowd were really into it too, reacting strongly to the mayhem and popping in all the right places. The so-called midget match used to be a staple of WWE back in the day, but Hornswoggle and El Torito went above and beyond when given the rare chance to have an updated one of their own. Thankfully, it wasn't referred to as a midget match anymore. Truly, I've really never seen anything quite like it. Number 83, Lita vs. Trish Stratus on Raw. Over a decade before the women's revolution changed the lay of the land in WWE as far as the opportunities that the company's female performers were offered, two Hall of Famers were doing everything in their power to change perceptions. Lita and Trish Stratus were part of a group along with the likes of Jazz, Victoria, and Molly Holly, who had tried to re-educate fans following years of the women primarily being used for bikini contests and bra and panties matches. Given the very rare chance to main event an episode of Raw, the two Trailblazers didn't waste a second of the time allotted to them and constructed a very hard-fought contest that helped inspire future generations, including Charlotte Flair, who was watching from the front row. There were thrills, spills, like Lita almost re-breaking her neck on a tope, and a thrilling closing stretch that saw the flame-haired risk-taker bag the gold over a year after coming back from reconstructive neck surgery. Number 82, Daniel Bryan vs. Randy Orton vs. Batista at WrestleMania 30. If Vince McMahon's original plan had come to fruition, the main event of WrestleMania 30 would have seen returning Hollywood hero Dave Batista capture the WWE World Heavyweight title by beating fellow developmental success story Randy Orton. WWE fans famously scuppered those plans, essentially hijacking WWE programming with the demand that the much-loved Daniel Bryan get his due and be put in the picture as well. D-Bry, on the back of the Yes movement, found his way into the WrestleMania main event mix via an opening match win over Triple H, though the odds were heavily stacked against him given the stature and comparative freshness of his opponents. But this would be the American Dragon's night, as he did the improbable and saw off management's preferred choices to bag the gold in front of a feverish New Orleans Superdome crowd. Heartening stuff and a genuinely great match to boot. Number 81, Triple H vs. Steve Austin at No Way Out 2001. Major blood feuds deserve an appropriate payoff, and it was feared that the dispute between Triple H and Steve Austin would end with a whimper after their lame Survivor Series main event climaxed with Stone Cold performing an outlandish bit of attempted vehicular homicide. Thankfully, the two enemies were able to settle their differences properly a few months later at No Way Out in a 3 Stages of Hell match. A 2 out of 3 falls match with a twist, the 3 Stages of Hell were a normal match first, street fight second, and if necessary, a cage match decider. The cerebral assassin and the bionic redneck gave every ounce of themselves over the course of 3 falls and 40 pulsating minutes. You should watch this one because it felt like a proper grudge match between two foes intent on beating the absolute hell out of each other. It's also obvious, in a good way, that the two are piecing a lot of it together as they go along, responding to the crowd's reactions and working based on feeling as opposed to adhering to a bunch of pre-planned spots. A lost art. Number 80, CM Punk vs. John Cena at Money in the Bank 2011. A tale of contrasts, the feud between John Cena and CM Punk would end up being era-defining. With it, you have the chiseled, all-American, company-made man and face of the brand going up against the alternative, rarely fancied, outspoken contrarian whose journey to the big time had taken a very different path. Sparked into life with a pipe bomb, the first major chapter in Punk and Cena's rivalry would take place at Money in the Bank 2011. It was, in truth, the very best of their many commendable efforts, the perfect storm of the storyline, Punk promising to leave the company as WWE champion when his contract expired hours after the show, both men being on top of their games, and a frenzied partisan Chicago crowd cheering on their second city saints. Those rabid punters in the Windy City that night sure did help elevate the match, turning it from a classic in its own right to an all-timer. It still stands as Punk's defining WWE moment and a great demonstration of Cena's considerable talents. Number 79, The Undertaker vs. Kurt Angle at No Way Out 2006. The zombie MMA guy versus the Olympic gold medal wrestler, only in WWE, right? The Undertaker and Kurt Angle had battled before and had good matches, but their World Heavyweight title headliner at No Way Out 2006 was the best of the lot. In a match that really deserved to go down a month later at WrestleMania, the dead man and the Olympic hero wrestled in a way that Taker had never really wrestled before, incorporating a lot more of his mixed martial arts techniques and trading submissions with the man who had made making people tap out his calling card. There was a lot more to this than ground-based bone bending, naturally, with some big moves and sports entertainment accoutrement like a gnarly angle slam through the announce table. The Undertaker had been enjoying a resurgence before this thanks to some cracking contests with Randy Orton, but this was the beginning of a stylistic shift for him that saw a marked uptick in form. It was also the last genuine classic Kurt was involved in before leaving the company just 6 months later. Number 78, Shawn Michaels vs. Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam 2005. An intergenerational dream match many thought would never happen, Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan finally squared off in the main event of SummerSlam 2005. There were egos, backstage politics, and other issues involved in getting there, but they managed to get the match in the ring, and what unfolded was truly extraordinary. It's not the greatest match either man has ever had, but it is absolutely fascinating to watch, in the main for Shawn's one-man show mentality and a apparent overselling, which some took as being a sarcastic shot at his all-powerful opponents. Michaels was allegedly dismayed that a proposed 3-match program, which would see him pick up a win in the rematch before the Hulkster inevitably won the feud, was nixed, as Hogan preferred the one-and-done approach, brother. The Heartbreak Kid's wink-nudge theatrics aside, there is still something very special about seeing 2 stars of this stature sharing the squared circle. Number 77, Kurt Angle and Ronda Rousey versus Triple H and Stephanie McMahon at WrestleMania 34. A debuting megastar from another sport, a returning legend reviving a classic rivalry, and 2 despised villains getting their comeuppance on the grandest stage of them all. There is a lot to love here. Truth is, it was hard to know what to expect going into this match, which stole the show at WrestleMania 34, since one of the participants had never had a pro match before, her partner was broken down and had only wrestled sporadically in the years prior, and their opponents were part-time in-ring performers and had been accused of using their political clout to do the opposite of what was best for business. All fears were quashed on the night, however, with a bout that was booked to perfection. Everyone involved doing their bit to make it a superb debut for Rousey, a nice return to Mania for a Hall of Fame legend, and a satisfying blow-off to a long-running storyline. A star-making debut for Rowdy Ronda on her first night in, but the 3 other people in there with her deserve a ton of credit for helping to facilitate it. Number 76, the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 21. It's incredible to think, considering how ubiquitous the match type and cash-in trope became afterwards, but the first Money in the Bank ladder match was considered a gamble, and even more incredibly, a couple of the participants, like Kane and inaugural winner Edge, didn't even want to be in it. Anyone with misgivings about being involved in the 6-way ladder match at WrestleMania 21 needn't have worried, because the finished product was remarkable. The big bumps and stunts were breathtaking, but there were also several running threads and stories told, like Chris Benoit fighting through a debilitating arm injury and coming within millimeters of winning, the collective effort to neutralize the Big Red Machine, and the freaky athleticism of Shelton Benjamin, who really seized his opportunity on such a big stage and made a couple of WrestleMania moments. There have been many awe-inspiring Money in the Bank matches since, but none have really been able to replicate the feeling of the original. Number 75, Eddie Guerrero vs JBL at Judgment Day 2004. In the wake of WrestleMania 20, the SmackDown brand was left with a serious lack of top-level heels for babyface WWE champion Eddie Guerrero to work with. So, WWE created a new one, repackaging career mid-card tag teamer Bradshaw as JBL. Their title showdown at Judgment Day was a stern test for Latino heat and a make-or-break moment for his opponent. Doing everything in his power to get the match and John Bradshaw Layfield over, Guerrero accidentally sprung a gusher midway through the contest, turning it from a so-so scrap to a blood-stained masterwork. It really is a tale of 2 matches, with everything after Eddie's gruesome blade job becoming instantly more compelling, as there was a very real sense of danger due to just how much claret he shed. JBL, to his credit, stepped up and managed to look like he belonged in his first headline appearance. The bloodshed may be a turn-off for some, but if you can stomach it, then Eddie vs JBL from Judgment Day 2004 is definitely worth your time. Number 74, Sasha Banks vs Becky Lynch vs Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 32. There had been signs that the women's evolution was about to begin in earnest when WWE seemed to signal its official start at WrestleMania 32. On that night, the company ditched the Divas title in favor of bringing back the Women's Championship, with 3 of the company's most promising talents, male or female, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair, all graduates of WWE Feeder Farm NXT, battling it out for the new prize. The best thing on the WrestleMania 32 card, this triple threat announced the arrival of 3 new stars and gave viewers a glimpse of the incredible things that they, as well as the likes of Bayley, Alexa Bliss, the Bellas and others, would do in the years ahead. Incredibly, this was a WrestleMania debut for all 3 ladies, and all 3 of them would go on to main event the show within 5 years. Number 73, Brock Lesnar vs The Rock at SummerSlam 2002. It's rare in WWE to see the torch being passed right in front of our very own eyes, but it does occasionally happen, and when it does, it's usually a significant moment that can be pointed to as the beginning of a new era that will change the business for years to come. One of the best examples of this is Brock Lesnar beating The Rock for the WWE title at SummerSlam 2002. The Great One already had one foot in Hollywood, and it was understood that his presence would be felt less and less, while the next big thing was new on the scene, the once-in-a-generation freak of nature having taken WWE by storm in the 5 months he'd been on television. Given more of a real sports build that emphasized both men's tremendous physical conditioning and respective athletic strengths, the match ushered in the era of Lesnar as not your typical slow-moving monster meathead, but as a competitive beast and a champion for the new millennium. It was Brock's first really great match, and much of the credit for that must go to the most electrifying man in sports entertainment who went above and beyond to do business the right way. Number 72, Tiger Mask vs. the Dynamite Kid in MSG. One of the most innovative matches in Japanese wrestling history came to WWE for one night when WWE ran Madison Square Garden on August 30th, 1982. The Dynamite Kid and original Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, had been revolutionizing wrestling with their battles in the Land of the Rising Sun, getting the attention of Vince McMahon, who had recently completed the purchase of WWE from his father, Vince Sr. Both Dynamite and Sayama were making their MSG debuts and wowed the expectant crowd with a style of wrestling they had never seen before. In all honesty, it wasn't quite at the caliber of their matches in New Japan, but there's something about watching those fans in New York lose their marbles at the grace and speed of the acrobatics on display. Truly, it must have been like looking into the future. The thing is, even 40 years later, there aren't many on their level, and it's still impressive to watch. Number 71, Shawn Michaels vs. Razor Ramon at WrestleMania 10. The first televised ladder match in WWE history, one between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, had been included on the Smack 'em Whack 'em VHS previously. This Intercontinental title bout between the Heartbreak Kid and the Bad Guy showed what the company's new generation of stars was all about. All the ingredients were there, with the match taking place inside the hallowed Madison Square Garden at the 10th WrestleMania. Ladder matches being such an unknown was both a help and a hindrance, as the audience didn't have any expectations or preconceived notions of what it would look like, but the lack of experience in working with the ladders must have made laying the match out a tricky proposition for Shawn and Razor. As he was one to do, HBK put forth a Herculean effort, bumping and throwing himself around like a man possessed in his bid to steal the show. It obviously helped that he and Scott Hall were close behind the scenes and were willing to make the other, but don't discount how much pressure must have been on them to deliver with the lights on brightest. Often cited as inspiration for future ladder match veterans, Michaels vs. Ramon at WrestleMania 10 was truly state-of-the-art stuff and an important WWE milestone. Number 70, the 1992 Royal Rumble. About half of the entrants in the 1992 Royal Rumble are now in the WWE Hall of Fame, though there's a lot more than mere star power to enjoy when it comes to what many still consider WWE's greatest Royal Rumble ever. The colourful cast of characters certainly make watching it more entertaining than other Rumbles where there are perhaps a disproportionate number of no-hopers involved. One of the things that makes it a worthy investment of your time is that this was the first time the 30-man over-the-top Battle Royal was fought over the WWE title itself, rather than a shot at it in the main event of WrestleMania. Though the stacked lineup features the likes of Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, The Undertaker, the British Bulldog, Jake Roberts, Randy Savage, and Sid Justice, the match belonged to Ric Flair, who lived up to his 60-minute man moniker by entering third and lasting a full hour to survive as the last man standing. An incredible tour de force, the Nature Boy's performance in the match is eminently watchable, and the bout lends to repeat viewings. Number 69, The Shield vs. the Wyatt family at Elimination Chamber 2014. Strong factions made quite the comeback in the early to mid-2010s, with the Shield and the Wyatt family leading the way. Eventually, something had to give, and the titanic first meeting was booked for the 2014 Elimination Chamber, which, coincidentally, was the last pay-per-view to air before the launch of the WWE Network a day later. Both the Shield and the Wyatt family will go down as two of the most legendary stables in WWE history, and their first match together did not disappoint. Both teams had momentum, the fans were invested in the action and outcome, and WWE gave them the best part of 25 minutes to play with. The talent on both sides dictated that the match would, from an in-ring standpoint, be at the very least good, but everyone involved busted their backsides and played their parts well, taking it to that next level. WWE was smart to strike while the iron was hot and book this match when they did, as the career trajectories of the participants would change significantly not too long after. Number 68, Hulk Hogan vs. Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. It's one of the most iconic matches and moments in WWE history, endlessly replayed via highlight reels, its legend seemingly growing in stature as time goes on. In the main event of WrestleMania 3, Hulk Hogan defended his WWE title against Andre the Giant, the irresistible force meeting the immovable object in front of a staggering and disputed 93,173 fans. It was WWE's biggest show ever to that point, and this was the marquee match, culminating with Hogan slamming Andre and pinning him to retain his crown and prolong the run of Hulkamania. As an actual match, it's actually pretty rotten, with the Hulkster unable to do much with a deteriorating Andre and everything outside of the finish being somewhat less than inspiring. But it's one of those matches that, as a fan, you really ought to see at least once, as it's such an important historical document. WWE is all about spectacle, and from a visual standpoint, not much beats Hogan vs. Andre at WrestleMania 3 as far as spectacle is concerned. Number 67, Kofi Kingston vs. Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 35. 5 years and one retirement after being the plucky underdog willed to the summit in the main event of WrestleMania 30, Daniel Bryan was the evil prick that everyone wanted to see lose the title to their new plucky underdog, Kofi Kingston. Funny how life works, isn't it? Kofi had found himself in this spot almost by accident, his sudden upswing in popularity displacing D-Bry's originally scheduled opponent, Kevin Owens, who was left off the show entirely as a consequence. Kingston had been a hard-working soldier for WWE for over a decade by this point, but he'd never managed to smash through that glass ceiling and cement himself at the top of the card. That all changed at WrestleMania 35 when he met the American Dragon in the best match of the night. There was good mat wrestling, some high flying, a bunch of nail-biting near falls, and importantly, plenty of psychology and a strong story told. They had the crowd the entire way, right up to the uplifting payoff. Number 66, Bruno Sammartino vs. Larry Zbyszko at Showdown at Shea 1980. You cannot talk about the history of WWE without mentioning Bruno Sammartino, the longtime champion who sold out Madison Square Garden more than any other. One man who admired, if not idolized, the living legend was Larry Zbyszko, who was trained by Bruno and presented as his protege. The inability of Zbyszko to step out of Sammartino's shadow led to him turning on his mentor in bloody fashion, kicking off a heated student versus teacher rivalry that led to a series of main event matches. Their dispute reached a fever pitch inside a cage at the 1980 Showdown at Shea show, which took place in front of over 36,000 people at New York Shea Stadium. Like a lot of Bruno's matches, it wasn't a technical masterpiece or anything close to it, but it was a great cage match, and the fans are molten because they really believed in their guy and bought into the storyline, which had been booked brilliantly. Number 65, The Undertaker vs. Triple H at WrestleMania 28. The Undertaker and Triple H's third WrestleMania meeting was billed as the end of an era. Not only would it be the last time the dead man in the game would cross paths at the Showcase of the Immortals, but it was the conclusion to a 4-year story that began with Taker's match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25. Mr. WrestleMania would be on hand here to act as special guest referee as his best friend and his former rival fought inside Hell in a Cell, a match both men knew very well. There was a lot of legacy to live up to here, but they managed to not only live up to it, but have their best ever match against one another. I mean, they just beat the absolute hell out of each other, no pun intended, with the presence of Michaels and the streak being tenuously close to ending on several occasions, really ramping up the drama as it wore on, building to a crescendo. I remember watching it at the time and thinking, I really hope this isn't actually the last time these three share a ring together, and then Saudi Arabia happened, and I curse myself for ever thinking such thoughts. Stupid brain. Number 64, Eddie Guerrero vs. Edge on SmackDown. Eddie Guerrero and Edge had tried on numerous occasions to have, if not a classic match, then one that measured up to the expectations placed on two such enviably talented performers. Their bouts at SummerSlam and Unforgiven were good, yes, but just about missed the mark. Given one last opportunity and told to go all out with no disqualification rules, Latino Heat and the Rated R Superstar had one of the best SmackDown matches in the history of the Blue brand on the September 26, 2002 edition of the show. Both men were mired in the mid-card at the time, but this was a match that made WWE management sit up and realize that they had two potential main eventers on their hands. They simply destroyed each other that night in a contest that turned into something of an unofficial ladder match. Watching it back, it's really no wonder that Edge would undergo major neck surgery just a few months later, as he took so much punishment, including a jaw-dropping sunset flip powerbomb from the top of the ladder. Despite losing the match and being a slimy heel, Guerrero received a justified standing ovation after he'd scraped himself off the canvas. Number 63, Rob Van Dam vs. John Cena at ECW One Night Stand 2006. Despite being one of the company's most popular performers, Rob Van Dam never won the ECW World title before the promotion closed its doors in 2001. He had the chance to somewhat right that wrong 5 years later when he challenged for John Cena's WWE title in the main event of the second One Night Stand. One Night Stand had been the brainchild of RVD, but he'd had to sit out the first one, save for cutting an explosive promo due to injury. Now, the longtime flag bearer for Paul Heyman's promotion had the chance to bag major gold in front of his fans. And boy, did the fans make themselves heard, not only showering the whole flippin' show with love, but also directing previously unseen amounts of hate towards Big Match John. Well, if anyone can rise above hate, it's John Cena, who shrugged off the hostility and had a banger with Mr. Money in the Bank. If you don't watch it at least once, we riot. Number 62, Sami Zayn vs. Johnny Knoxville at WrestleMania 38. That's right, Jackass star Johnny Knoxville is in one of the 101 WWE matches you need to watch at least once. What about it? Truth be told, I'm sure a lot of people who both have and haven't seen Knoxville's WrestleMania 38 Anything Goes match with Sami Zayn are gonna be just furious about its inclusion. Zayn himself has since stated that of all the great matches he's been involved in throughout his career, he would put this one up against any of them, and that he's intensely proud of it. And with good reason, because it really was a fantastic achievement, and anyone who watches it won't soon forget about it. Naturally, it was very gimmicky, with weapons, stunts, and run-ins by other Jackass alumni. It's silly, it's bags of fun, and it's genuinely very impressive that they were able to do it all so well. Plus, it really wound Jim Cornette up, so that's a bonus in my book. Number 61, the Fabulous Moolah vs. Wendy Richter at the Brawl to End It All. While Hulk Hogan and WrestleMania had a great deal to do with WWE's mid-80s explosion in popularity, a lot of credit must go to the Rock and Wrestling connection too, specifically the involvement of Cyndi Lauper. The woman behind such hits as Girls Just Want to Have Fun and Time After Time helped WWE reach a youthful mainstream MTV audience, starting with the Brawl to End It All. Lauper seconded Wendy Richter for her women's championship match with the Fabulous Moolah, who had had a monopoly on the title for close to 30 years at that point, though the real length is disputed due to some actual but unacknowledged title changes. The match was nothing to shout about, of course, but it was hugely important, airing live on MTV and attracting a massive 9.0 rating, making it the most watched program in the history of the station at the time. Richter won the title in controversial circumstances too, ending Moolah's record-setting reign. When telling the history of WWE, you cannot do it without mentioning Wendy Richter, Cyndi Lauper, and the Rock and Wrestling connection. Or Bob Holly, for that matter, but that's another conversation for another day. Number 60, Bret Hart vs. the British Bulldog at SummerSlam 1992. At the 1991 SummerSlam, Bret Hart won the Intercontinental title from Mr. Perfect in a classic, as we've already discussed, inside Madison Square Garden, solidifying his status as a singles star to watch. 1 year later, the Hitman was defending the title against brother-in-law Davey Boy Smith, aka the British Bulldog, in front of a sold-out Wembley Stadium. On this night, it would be Bulldog's big moment as he won his first WWE singles title in front of his countrymen. As a match taken strictly at face value, it is a brilliant piece of work, the two men going at it hard and fast for 25 breathless minutes, keeping everyone guessing as to which way the result would go. But when you know the story behind the match, it's even more impressive. Davey Boy was, shall we say, not in the best of ways when the bell rang, having spent the weeks leading up to the event indulging in his vices rather than training hard. It was up to the pink and black attack to carry him through it, which he did without anyone being the wiser. Still, and perhaps forever, the best WWE match to have taken place on UK soil. Number 59, Umaga vs Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania 23. It may have been Bobby Lashley versus Umaga in the ring, but the Battle of the Billionaires was all about Donald Trump versus Vince McMahon. The two evil billionaires put their hair on the line as their two representatives fought, with Steve Austin drafted in to oversee everything as guest referee. Say what you will about McMahon and Trump, but the Battle of the Billionaires was an absolutely sensational piece of business, helping to draw a then record 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. For pure sports entertainment value, Umaga vs Lashley takes some topping. I mean, where else are you going to see a future president of the United States take the second worst ever Stone Cold Stunner? Where else are you going to see the former WWE CEO get his head shaved? Nowhere. That's where. Number 58, Braun Strowman vs Brock Lesnar vs Roman Reigns vs Samoa Joe at SummerSlam 2017. Big, meaty men slapping meat. That is what the main event of SummerSlam 2017 was all about, as these four beautiful monsters tore down Brooklyn's Barclays Center. Lesnar was defending his WWE Universal title, with the stipulation that, if he lost, both he and Heyman would have to leave WWE. What transpired was a train wreck, and I mean that in the most complimentary way possible. There was no fancy footwork on display here, just four dudes smashing each other and trying to destroy whoever they could whenever they had the chance, be it with fists, feet, announce tables, or the steel stairs. WWE have presented a bunch of these chaotic multi-man title matches over the years, but this one is one of the most enjoyable of all. It wasn't pretty, but it was never dull, and it kept people guessing for its not inconsiderable 20-minute runtime. Best watched with steak and eggs, one of those beer dispensing hats, and at least some form of tobacco for dessert. Number 57, Shawn Michaels vs Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 21. When Shawn Michaels made his improbable WWE return in 2002, fans immediately started booking him in fantasy matchups against the crop of stars that had emerged in the time since he was forced to retire 4 years earlier. One name that cropped up on everybody's list was Kurt Angle, though it would take WWE a few years to book the dream match. When it finally happened, appropriately at WrestleMania 21, it was well worth the wait. Two of the best of all time, given almost 30 minutes to play with at the granddaddy of them all. WWE made the match expecting nothing short of a classic, and that is just what they got, as the Heartbreak Kid and the Olympic Hero demonstrated just why they are as highly regarded as they are, not only when it comes to technique between the ropes, but also at manipulating fans' emotions. And they did it all without any wacky gimmick or stipulation attached. This was just two proud wrestlers trying to prove why they were the absolute best. And they did. Number 56, Ric Flair vs Mr. Perfect on Raw. A year after his stellar performance and victory in the 1992 Royal Rumble match, Ric Flair was on his way out of WWE and back to WCW. He still had some house show commitments and would stick around for another few weeks to ensure they were fulfilled, but his television swan song took place on the January 25th, 1993 episode of Raw, just the third ever edition of WWE's flagship. In it, he took on former manager Mr. Perfect in a loser leaves town match. The first ever really good Raw match, the two men had a very competitive, almost 20-minute long contest. It's not the best match either man ever had, but it was wrestled with a real sense of urgency, and the desperate commentary from the Nature Boy's close confidant Bobby Heenan also added much to the presentation. A noble way for Flair to exit for the first time, and a great early moment for the longest running weekly episodic television show in history. And no, I'm not on the WWE payroll. roll. Not yet anyway. Woo! Number 55, Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. Hulkamania had been running wild for 6 incredibly profitable years when Vince McMahon decided that the red and yellow train needed to be pulled into the station. There was a new neon-soaked locomotive ready to be put on the tracks, with Vince believing that the Ultimate Warrior was the heir apparent to Hogan's crown. The torch was due to be passed in the main event of WrestleMania 6 as they geared up for an epic showdown with both the Intercontinental and World titles at stake. Neither Hogan nor Warrior have ever been noted for their pure wrestling ability or desire to work long competitive matches, but against one another they put on one hell of a show. It may be a relic of its time viewed through today's eyes, but for them to go 25 minutes in an all-babyface encounter and take fans on such an emotional rollercoaster is nothing to sniff at. The two men in the ring deserve a ton of credit, but so too does Pat Patterson, who supposedly mapped the match out with Terry and Jim beforehand. A comic book movie come to life. The only Hogan vs. Warrior match in WWE was a clash of two living superheroes. Number 54, The Undertaker vs. AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36. With the COVID-19 pandemic throwing the world into disarray, many people thought or assumed that WWE would cancel WrestleMania 36, which had originally been scheduled to take place in front of the packed Raymond James Stadium in Florida. WWE, determined to live up to the maxim that the show must go on no matter what, decided to forge ahead and present a WrestleMania like never before. The highlight of the two-day event was AJ Styles and The Undertaker meeting for the first time in a Boneyard match. Filmed in a cinematic style, the Boneyard match was an ingenious way to work around the lack of a live audience and provided the perfect last ride for the Phenom. A lot of cinematic matches came in its wake, but the phenomenal one of the Dead Man really set a standard, with credit also going to the team who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to get it filmed and edited in time. A true example of creativity and resourcefulness, and a storybook way to end a legendary career. Number 53, Brock Lesnar vs. Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 31. Alright, so we might be a little bit bored by Brock Lesnar vs. Roman Reigns due to WWE booking it about 5,000 times in the past several years, but before the combination became played out, it was pretty good value, particularly their first meeting for the WWE title at WrestleMania 31. This was the Brock show as he took control for most of the match and delighted in finding new and wonderful ways to batter the company's supposed top babyface. The big dog gave as good as he got, rocking Lesnar with some stiff shots of his own and busting the Beast Incarnate open. It was chugging along nicely and would have been great anyway, but Seth Rollins, who had lost earlier in the night to Randy Orton, decided that this was the stage to cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase, turning the match into a three-way. What transpired after was one of the most exciting endings in WrestleMania history. I mean, the only thing that I could think of that could possibly better it would be, I don't know, somebody lifting the ring off the ground with a tractor or something. That would never happen. Number 52, Cody Rhodes vs. Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell 2022. Wrestlers are used to working through injuries, whether it's the general wear and tear that life on the road all but guarantees, or a more serious break or tear suffered during the course of a match itself. Ordinarily, when a wrestler suffers a complete tear of their pectoral muscle and ends up with so much bruising that their body resembles Barney the goddamn dinosaur, they would probably pull out of upcoming matches and schedule surgery ASAP, especially if their next bout is inside a huge cage and has heavy expectations going in as a pay-per-view main event. Cody Rhodes is quite simply no ordinary wrestler, which he proved when he decided to go 25 agonizing minutes with Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell 2022. Not only was it a gutsy performance on the American Nightmare's behalf, but the match itself was genuinely brilliant and better than even the most hopeful fans probably assumed it would be when news of Cody's ailment became public knowledge. Number 51, Hulk Hogan vs. Mr. McMahon at WrestleMania 19. There are several matches that could be considered genuine main events at WrestleMania 19, but WWE made the decision to promote Hulk Hogan vs. Vince McMahon front and center. And why wouldn't they? At the end of the day, this was two of the biggest personalities in wrestling history going against one another, the promoter trying to crush the star that helped make him a fortune. The Hulkster was older and more beat up than he had been even a year before, and Vince has always moved like his legs are made from cement, so this was never going to be one for the purists. No, this was pure sports entertainment theatrics, pal, with Hogan and McMahon playing to their strengths and the match being overbooked in a bloody good way. There was blood, stunts including Vince doing a leg drop off a ladder through the announce table, the mad bastard, and surprises like the first WWE appearance of Roddy Piper for 7 years. A big-time stadium spectacle and a first-class piece of Jerry action. Number 50, John Cena vs Umaga at Royal Rumble 2007. After John Cena became WWE champion and his popularity skyrocketed, the backlash began in earnest. To some who had cheered on the Doctor of Thugonomics and his rise to the summit, Cena had become a hokey, child-pandering merchandise machine, and they did not like it one bit. Before long, people began not just attacking his character, but also his ring work and perceived lack of grit. Even though Big Match John had been in his fair share of bloody brawls, his last man standing match with Umaga at the 2007 Royal Rumble is seen as a turning point where perceptions began to change. Against the Samoan Bulldozer, Cena had to dig very deep to survive a grisly and very inventive bout with his WWE title on the line. This also stands as Umaga's best ever WWE match. Even though he was involved in the Battle of the Billionaires, he very much had to share the spotlight with several others. Here, he was the main man and showed the world what a tremendous talent he was and what he could produce when given the opportunity. Number 49, the Elimination Chamber at Survivor Series 2002. Like the previously discussed Money in the Bank ladder match, WWE fans didn't know exactly what to expect the first time they saw the Elimination Chamber. They'd seen the blueprints and had it hyped up plenty beforehand, but just how would it all play out? Sort of WWE's answer to old NWA/WCW favorite war games, the Elimination Chamber was a genius invention that has become one of WWE's signature matches over the past 20 years, with an eponymous pay-per-view being added to the calendar, as with Money in the Bank. At Survivor Series 2002, World Heavyweight Champion Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, Kane, Booker T and Rob Van Dam were walking into the unknown, but they collectively did everything they could to make sure the Elimination Chamber's life started out on the right foot. It wasn't always smooth and not everything went according to plan, least of all the game suffering a crushed larynx when RVD hit him with a 5-star frog splash from the top of a holding pod, but it was an auspicious debut for the Chamber, filled with memorable moments. Most memorable of all was the end, with Michaels pinning Triple H to win a world title for the last time in his career. Hall of Fame lineup, MSG setting, feel-good win. You know you want this, you schlags. Just ignore HBK's turd tights and little Dutch boy haircut. Number 48, John Cena vs The Fiend Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 36. The first night of WrestleMania 36, which had been thrown into flux due to the COVID-19 pandemic, belonged to the Boneyard match between The Undertaker and AJ Styles. The best thing on night 2 was a cinematic creation of an altogether different nature, with John Cena and Bray Wyatt bending minds inside the Firefly Funhouse. Not so much a wrestling match as almost a piece of experimental theatre, the Firefly Funhouse was unlike anything anyone could have predicted when it was first announced. Full of illusions and in-jokes, it was a time hop through the careers of both men as they recreated famous scenes from the past like John Cena's WWE debut and created their own bizarre scenarios such as Bray and John's alternative NWO lineup. It was like a fever dream of the David Lynch variety, and it didn't go over well with everyone. But whether you like it or not, it's certainly one of a kind, and while there's no real wrestling in it, so to speak, it's certainly another creative way to have a match in unprecedented circumstances. Number 47, Bret Hart vs Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13. WrestleMania 13 was, on the whole, a bit of a dud, but if anything could save it, it's a match between two all-time greats in Steve Austin and Bret Hart. Stone Cold and the Hitman had been warring for months, leading to this submission match with UFC star Ken Shamrock as special guest referee. Austin had misgivings about the match since he didn't have an established submission hold unlike Bret Hart's sharpshooter finisher, while the excellence of execution believed that he was on a course for a rematch with Shawn Michaels until the sexy boy misplaced his smile. Making the absolute best out of the situation they found themselves in, the two men proceeded to contest an ultra-realistic and incredibly heated brawl that stands today as one of the greatest matches in company history. Both men knew who they were and believed fully in their characters, making audience suspension of disbelief that much easier, helped in no small part due to the very snug way the two men worked. The finish is quite simply iconic too, with a bloodied Austin passing out in Brett's preferred hold rather than cry uncle. There just aren't enough superlatives to adequately describe the match, finish, and post-match double turn, all of which were done to the very highest standard. So just watch it, alright? Number 46, Pat Patterson vs. Sergeant Slaughter in MSG. A good many years before ECW made Extreme in vogue, Pat Patterson and Sergeant Slaughter were teaching WWE fans the meaning of the word with their alley fight in Madison Square Garden on May 4th, 1981. After several matches between the two enemies resulted in a disqualification or countout, the booker decided that they would meet in a match that could not end with any ambiguity. Not only that, the alley fight didn't even have a referee on hand to intervene, even when Sarge suffered a massive cut to his head and ended up wearing the proverbial crimson mask. This was just two guys squaring off in a battle to the bitter end. Hardcore before hardcore was a thing, the alley fight featured very little in the way of actual wrestling or pre-planned spots. They just went out there and kicked and punched and hit each other with whatever they could get their nasty little hands on. The climax is manly as hell too, as Pat takes off his cowboy boot and repeatedly rams it into Slaughter's head to the point that his manager, the Grand Wizard, is forced to come out and throw in the towel. Number 45, CM Punk vs. Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam 2013. The best versus the beast. The last truly great match that CM Punk had before infamously walking away from WWE was with Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam 2013. The two Paul Heyman guys went the classic David versus Goliath route in this no disqualification affair, with Brock using his aggressive force to continually neutralize the plucky Punk. For some reason, nobody in WWE had thought to do David vs. Goliath with Lesnar since his return to the company some 16 months earlier, but luckily the straight-edge superstar was on hand to show them how it's done. There was fantastic brawling, violence, great counters, some nice MMA influence on display, and real drama, especially down the finishing stretch. The only thing really missing from it was maybe blood, but that's a consequence of the PG times it happened in and in no way detracts from an incredible match. A bully heel against a spirited babyface, with both men giving everything they had and coming out of the match better than they went into it, Punk vs. Brock really was a great piece of business, and it's a crying shame we only saw it once. Appreciate it. Number 44, Stephanie McMahon vs. Trish Stratus at No Way Out 2001. Trish Stratus eventually developed into a very good worker, helping change the way women were perceived in WWE on her way to becoming a Hall of Famer. In the beginning, however, the Canadian former fitness model was just another pretty face and hadn't yet developed the skills that would see her retire as a 7-time women's champion. The first inkling that Trish may have had what it takes to excel as an actual in-ring performer came during her match with Stephanie McMahon at No Way Out 2001, an unlikely suspect considering her own lack of in-ring experience. The two ladies had been engaged in a heated rivalry around Trish's affair with Stephanie's father, and the two went at it like cats and dogs, and the results were genuinely miraculous. Like any match with a McMahon involved, this was more about pure theatrics, story and entertainment than about the quality of the moves or anything like that. Both Stratus and the Billion-Dollar Princess turned heads and shut up critics, as they would continue to do for the rest of their careers. Number 43, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T versus Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff at WrestleMania 1. It's quite the understatement to say that the first WrestleMania was a gamble for Vince and Linda McMahon, who essentially rolled the dice and bet everything on the show being a success. They had put all of their eggs in the WrestleMania basket in a make-or-break move that thankfully paid off. A big reason for the original WrestleMania's success was the celebrity involvement, including A-Team star Mr. T's presence in the tag team main event. Clubber Lang joined forces with Thunderlips to take on the dastardly duo of Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. Adding extra pizzazz were Jimmy Snuka and Bob Orton Jr. at ringside, along with the iconic Muhammad Ali, who was the special outside referee/enforcer. The match itself is, okay. But if you are going to watch it, and you really should, do so for the hot crowd, the larger-than-life characters, the immense hype, the importance, and the history of it all. I pity the fool who's never seen it. Number 43, Shawn Michaels vs. Triple H at SummerSlam 2002. One thing WWE does better than just about anyone is presenting a wrestler's comeback, particularly if they're a major star. Whether it's as a surprise or promoted heavily ahead of time, they seem to have a knack of making a return, especially the more improbable ones, seem like a major deal. That was undoubtedly the case in the summer of 2002, when Shawn Michaels wrestled his first match in over 4 years after being forced to retire due to a severe back injury. The showstopper stepped back into the squared circle to take on former D-Generation X understudy Triple H in a non-sanctioned bout at that year's SummerSlam. It was hard to know what to expect going into it, given the stipulation and the question marks surrounding Shawn's condition, with some speculating whether his back would be able to hold up to the task. Michaels put everyone's mind at ease by entering a vintage performance harkening back to his heyday. It was the start of not just a longer comeback, but a whole second act in HBK's career. Number 41, the 2010 Royal Rumble. For a Royal Rumble match to be considered truly great, it must contain several elements, like star power, a surprise entrant or two, a couple of interesting story threads running through it, a shocking elimination, etc., etc. The 2010 version ticked just about all these boxes and turned out to be one of the best Rumbles ever. There was plenty of star power, with believable winners in the way of Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Batista, Chris Jericho, John Cena, and others. There was the great bit at the start with CM Punk, who alternated between eliminating people and cutting a promo. Beth Phoenix became only the second woman in history to enter the Rumble match and eliminated the Great Khali while doing so. Shawn Michaels pulled at the heartstrings after he was eliminated, his quest to win the match and get another shot at The Undertaker at WrestleMania ostensibly ended. And then there was the shock return of Edge, who came back from injury to win the match for the first time in his career. In between all that, there is plenty to enjoy, and the 50 minutes fly by. Number 40, the Hart Foundation vs. Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and the Legion of Doom at In Your House Canadian Stampede. The last ever proper 2-hour WWE In Your House pay-per-view went out with a bang as the Hart Foundation clashed with a team led by Steve Austin in a Canada vs USA 10-man tag held in front of a molten crowd in Calgary. If the show had been emanating from the United States, Stone Cold and his crew would have been the heroes, but since it was taking place in the Great White North, it was Brett, Owen, Bulldog, The Anvil, and Pillman who were feverishly cheered on from their entrances to when the final bell was rung. Not only was it very good as an actual match, but the mixed-up dynamic was a real novelty and something that WWE didn't necessarily welcome back then. When people talk about crowd heat, this is what they are referring to, as everything garnered a reaction, with the noise increasing throughout the 25-minute duration until the Bonzo Gonzo finish. The post-match scene with the extended Hart family celebrating in the ring is bittersweet, as tragedy after tragedy would strike not too long after. It's good to remember them all during happier times. Number 39, John Cena vs. The Rock at WrestleMania 28. Icon versus icon. Past versus present. Two Hollywood heavyweights collide. Once in a lifetime, but not really. John Cena vs. The Rock is the sort of blockbuster event tailor-made for the bright lights and grand stage of WrestleMania. The two superstars, who had legitimate beef with one another stretching back years, had one of the most entertaining feuds ever going into the match, which managed to measure up to lofty expectations. Dwayne Johnson hadn't wrestled a long singles match in close to a decade, but didn't display any signs of ring rust as he rolled back the years and went for 30 minutes with the face that runs the place. Was he a little bit gassed at the end? Understandably so, yes, but the match was the epic that everyone was promised, and it was one hell of an effort for a man who had been on set for so many years. The Great One and Big Match John helped WrestleMania 28 generate a whopping 1,217,000 pay-per-view buys, a WWE record. Number 38, Hulk Hogan vs. Randy Savage at WrestleMania 5. The Mega Powers explode. Back in the so-called Golden Era, WWE's policy was to book things long-term, whether that be title runs, singular storylines, or a wrestler's next 2 or 3 feuds. Forward-thinking and pre-planning things out? A mad concept, I know. A shining example of this approach paying off was when Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan met in the main event of WrestleMania 5. The Macho Man and the Hulkster went from best friends and trusted tag partners to sworn enemies after Savage became paranoid that Hogan was trying to steal Miss Elizabeth away from him. No comment. The slow burn storyline, eventual breakup angle, and resultant match were all handled brilliantly. This was classic 1980s WWE in the way a lot of the match was worked, with the lovely Liz being involved frequently at the beginning. Savage was utterly convincing as the jealous, raving lunatic because, well, you know, whereas Hogan did his babyface shtick and put the work in on his way to winning his second WWE title. Number 37, Kurt Angle vs. Shane McMahon at King of the Ring 2001. Kurt Angle is rightly noted for his intensity and being one of the best pure wrestlers in the history of the industry. The gold medalist knows his way around a suplex or a submission hold, but found himself outside of his comfort zone when he faced Shane McMahon in an extraordinary street fight at the 2001 King of the Ring. It was the third bout of the night for Angle, who had wrestled Christian and Edge in tournament matches earlier on. Seeing red after Shane-O had cost him the opportunity to become king for the second consecutive year, Kurt tortured the boss's son in one of the most brutal WWE matches ever. Seriously, both men got banged up something fierce here, as they did not hold back one bit, with the most memorable moment being when Angle put Shane through panes of glass that were part of the entrance set. They stole the show, but it came at a real physical cost. Number 36, The Rock vs. Triple H at SummerSlam 1998. They turned into two of the biggest stars of the Attitude Era, but it wasn't always that way for The Rock and Triple H. The People's Champion was finding his feet after embracing his heelish side as the leader of the Nation of Domination, while the game was attempting to establish himself as the new leader of DX following the retirement of Shawn Michaels, when the two met over The Rock's Intercontinental title in a ladder match at SummerSlam 1998. It was a star-making performance from both men, turning them from mid-carders to main eventers in waiting. It's historically important as the moment where two future greats properly broke away from the pack, but it's also a hellacious fight and holds up a lot better than some other ladder matches because it's all about story, violence, and, you know, actually trying to win the damn match rather than just a bunch of dangerous spots. Dwayne and Hunter would have more battles in later years, including pay-per-view main events for the WWE title, which are also worth checking out even if they don't appear on our list. You can see the seeds of greatness being sown at SummerSlam 98. Number 35, The Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels at In Your House Bad Blood. The second Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels 5-star classic on this countdown, and don't you worry, there's another one coming in just a little bit. Sorry, not sorry. 12 years before they tore the house down at WrestleMania 25, Taker and HBK had the first ever Hell in a Cell match, a gimmick necessitated in order to make sure that nobody interfered and that there was a true winner, pitched by Jim Cornette and inspired by the last Battle of Atlanta roofed cage match from 14 years prior. It was another opportunity for Michaels to put in a devil-may-care performance, bumping around like an absolute lunatic, including taking a fall off the side of the cell and through the announce table. Seriously, Shawn was on another level when he wanted to be, and the Phenom held up his end of the bargain too, more than happy to play pinball with his opponent's body. It was revolutionary, bloody, unpredictable, and had an all-time great finish as Kane made his long-awaited debut to kick off the long-running saga with his kayfabe brother. Number 34, Jimmy Snuka vs. Bob Backlund in MSG. When telling the story of WWE, it would be remiss to overlook the impact that certain stars made before Vince McMahon's national expansion drive in the mid-80s. Prior to Hulkamania taking over, it was down to the likes of Jimmy Snuka and Bob Backlund to shift tickets and draw ratings. A fine example of their collective work is the WWE title cage match main event the two had together inside Madison Square Garden on June 28, 1982. It wasn't pretty, but it was very effective and had tremendous crowd heat as the fans really wanted to see Superfly end the champion's reign. Snuka ended up sporting a crimson mask in his pursuit of the gold as Backlund sent him face first into the steel. They continued to beat on each other until the barefoot high flyer went for the spectacular, foreshadowing an iconic scene over a year later when Snuka would meet Morocco in the same match type in the same venue. The challenger leapt from the top of the cage with an attempted Superfly splash, only to miss his intended target and crash in a heap on the canvas, allowing the champ to escape and retain his title. A historically significant clash between two important 80s icons and a highlight of Backlund's lengthy WWE title reign. Number 33, Rey Mysterio vs. Chris Jericho at the Bash 2009. The Intercontinental title is, or at least should be, one of the most prestigious in WWE. At times though, the bloom has come off the rose and the perception of the IC title has diminished in the eyes of the fans. In 2009, Rey Mysterio and Chris Jericho did much to restore it to its former glory with a series of stupendous matches, including a trio on pay-per-view. In a perfect world, these matches would be watched in sequence as each one builds on the one before it, leading to the title versus mask match at the Bash. The pick of the bunch, the Ultimate Underdog and Y2J flowed like water as they exchanged moves and counters to counters and counters to counters to counters, the way only two veterans of their craft can. They took the audience one way, only to pull them in a completely different direction, playing off previous encounters in a wonderful example of storytelling and rewarding those that had followed their feud from the get-go. The finish, with Jericho trying to steal the mask only to discover it was a decoy and Mysterio had another one underneath, fit the context of their rivalry to a T. Number 32, John Cena vs. Daniel Bryan at SummerSlam 2013. One of these men ticked all of the Vince McMahon likes this boxes, from his training to his look to, well, everything about his presentation and character. It's why he was on top for an entire decade plus. The other ticked very few of those same boxes because he was short, favoured a technical style honed on the indies and overseas, and get this, he was a vegan. By rights, Daniel Bryan shouldn't have been challenging John Cena for the WWE title in the main event of SummerSlam 2013, let alone winning the damn thing, but his personality, talent, and overall likability forced WWE's hand. Though they were in many ways polar opposites, D-Bry and Big Match John shared much in common, along with their love of the Bella Twins, when it came to doing what they could do to put on great matches. And this was a great match, by no means carried by the American Dragon, who got his long-earned moment by besting the face that runs the place clean as a sheet. The post-match betrayal by special guest referee Triple H and cash-in by Randy Orton only intensified the growing yes movement too. Number 31, Chris Benoit vs. Triple H vs. Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 20. A match, and especially an ending, that brings up conflicting feelings given what would happen in the 3 or so years that followed. The triple threat World Heavyweight title main event of WrestleMania 20 is nonetheless remarkable. The three men tasked with headlining the 20th WrestleMania were expected to deliver a 5-star classic for the MSG faithful and millions watching around the world, and they delivered in spades. Triple H and Michaels had been feuding for the best part of 2 years and would continue to do so afterwards, but Benoit's involvement added extra intrigue and fans were heavily invested in seeing him realize a dream 18 years in the making. He got there in the end, but he had to earn it on the biggest night in his long career. There were many great teases where it looked like the Game or the Heartbreak Kid would walk away with the gold before the Rabid Wolverine forced the reigning champ to tap out clean in the middle. The post-match embrace between Benoit and best friend Eddie Guerrero is heartbreaking in retrospect, but it was a great moment at the time, the cherry on the top of the cake. Number 30, Brock Lesnar vs. Eddie Guerrero at No Way Out 2004. As the business has changed and the average size of WWE stars has shrunk, it's no longer deemed unusual when somebody under, say, 6 feet tall and 220 pounds wins the big one. It certainly wasn't a regular occurrence when Eddie Guerrero beat Brock Lesnar to bag the WWE title at No Way Out 2004 though. The next big thing was the WWE Ideal, an all-American super freak who was really coming into his stride as a performer and just about to peak athletically. Latino Heat was undersized by standards of the time, a charismatic veteran wrestler, yes, but one who had spent most of his career in the United States as a mid-carder. Unexpectedly overcoming Lesnar in a tiring 30-minute war of attrition, Eddie realized a dream that he probably suspected was well out of reach, especially when he had been fired 2 odd years before due to substance abuse issues. A deserved moment at the end of a great match for one of WWE's most missed legends. Number 29, Shawn Michaels vs. The Undertaker at WrestleMania 26. Yes, it's our third Shawn Michaels vs. Undertaker match. I did tell you, I did warn you. Sorry, not sorry. Alright, maybe I am a bit sorry, but the truth is these two had just an insane level of chemistry with one another, and leaving off any of the three would feel wrong. And this is a historic match, as it was the last one in the Showstopper's career. Well, at least until Saudi Arabia, but let's just all agree to pretend that that never happened, shall we? A rematch from the year before, WWE smartly put Michaels and Taker on last this time, as HBK fought once again to end the streak, knowing that if he lost, he would never be able to wrestle again. It was a different match than the previous one, though with some neat callbacks to it. They actually built on what they had done before and managed to keep a tired crowd enthused at the end of a long night, with some of the closest near falls you're ever likely to see before the inevitable. A fitting end for one of the GOATs. Number 28, Rob Van Dam vs. Jeff Hardy at Invasion. The 2001 WCW and ECW invasion of WWE was a bit of a colossal failure, all things considered, but one of the silver linings of the whole thing was the emergence of Rob Van Dam on the global stage. The whole flippin' show got over with the WWE audience immediately because he was simply unlike anyone else on the roster at the time. The closest thing to him in terms of style and laid-back demeanor was probably Jeff Hardy, who, it transpired, made for a complimentary adversary. Their best match together was their first, a show-stealing hardcore title match at the Invasion pay-per-view. A lot of hardcore title matches from the era felt like an endless succession of inconsequential bin-lid shots and bordered on comedy, but Rob and Jeff forewent that in favor of high-flying, audience-brawling, some big stunts, and just a couple of weapons like a chair and ladder. If you're going to watch one WWE hardcore title match, make it this one. Number 27, Owen Hart vs. Bret Hart at WrestleMania 10. A relatable story that many can sympathize with is the tale of the jealous brother. In wrestling, warring brothers can make for a compelling storyline, but they don't always have chemistry when it comes to throwing down in the ring. That was not something that Bret and Owen Hart had to worry about when they wrestled each other for the first time ever in the opener of WrestleMania 10. A complete and utter clinic, the Hitman and the Rocket didn't put a foot wrong for 20 beautiful minutes, telling a fantastic story by pacing themselves and letting the match build naturally. Bret called himself the excellence of execution, and the execution by both was first rate here, which is even more impressive when you know that they completely changed the game plan up in the days before the show, eliminating much of Owen's high-flying offense in favor of sneaky heel tactics. It worked like a charm and really helped elevate Bret's baby brother, setting him up for some WWE title showdowns with the Pink and Black Attack a few months down the line. Flawless. Number 26, Steve Austin vs. Kevin Owens at WrestleMania 38. There is definitely a place for nostalgia in wrestling, especially on a special occasion like WrestleMania. There was really no better place for Steve Austin to have his first match in 19 years than at 2022's Showcase of the Immortals, which took place in Austin's beloved Lone Star State. It wasn't advertised as an actual match ahead of time, but anyone who followed the news or saw the shape that the Texas Rattlesnake had gotten himself into in preparation knew that things would turn physical. KO had spent months running down Texas, and Austin finally had enough, coming out of retirement for an impromptu match to close out night one of Mania 38. There was concern that Austin would look old and worn down, since he was in his 50s and had well-documented injury woes, but those concerns were brushed aside as he and Owens had a sprawling Attitude-era throwback brawl that made viewers who watched Stone Cold in his prime all fuzzy for 1998. Now where's my South Park VHS and 20p bottle of Panda Pop when I need them? Number 25, TLC 2 at WrestleMania X7. It must be incredibly hard to produce a worthy sequel to a classic match, especially when that match is as stunning as the first tables, ladders, and chairs match. It's a testament to the talent, creativity, and fearlessness of Edge and Christian, the Hardys, and the Dudleys that they were able to not only match their initial effort, but surpass it at WrestleMania X7. To recap, all the thrills, spills, and genuine insanity in it would be trite, but TLC 2 is about as perfect a spot fest as you can get. All 6 men were hungry to improve on their first effort, especially as this match would be in front of such a huge crowd at WrestleMania. And it wasn't just the 3 teams that contributed either, but Rhino, Spike Dudley, and Lita, who all got involved in the chaos as well. Standout moments include Edge spearing Jeff from high above, Matt and Bubba sailing through a stack of tables at ringside, and Jeff's signature swanton off a ladder through a table, but everything here is impressive, and it builds tremendously as the stunts and drama intensify with each hair-raising minute. Number 24, Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik in MSG. This is about as 1980s WWE as it gets. You've got the American-made babyface star taking on the heel from distant lands in Madison Square Garden with the WWE title on the line. The Iron Sheik had only won the title from Bob Backlund 28 days beforehand, and fans in MSG must have had an inkling that the man from Tehran, Iran was a mere transitional champion in order to get the title around the waist of the Golden Goose. As an actual match, there's really not that much to it, and it barely lasts 5 minutes before Hogan leg drops his way into the history books by winning his first WWE title. That said, it's perfect for what it is, and they were wise to keep things short so as not to expose Hulk on his first big night. It kicked off the modern era in WWE with a bang and is a truly history-making happening. Worth watching together with the pre- and post-match interviews, of course, as they are very much part of the full presentation. Brother! Number 23, Team Cena versus Team Authority at Survivor Series 2014. What good would a list of must-watch once WWE matches be without at least one traditional Survivor Series elimination tag? No good, that's what. But trust me when I tell you I'm not just arbitrarily sticking the 2014 Survivor Series main event on here. It is genuinely very good and sticks out more than a lot of the others because of the various stories being told, the stipulations at play, and the typically high standard of the work. Special credit must go to Dolph Ziggler, who did his best Shawn Michaels impression as the babyface battling the numerical odds at the end. It was hard not to be roped in by the pageantry of it all, and once WWE knew they had us, they chose the moment to bring out Sting for his first ever WWE appearance, and talk about peaking early. There are a lot of moving parts, and it might not work quite as well so far removed from the context of what was happening at the time, but it does still work, and there's enough going on from unexpected eliminations to less than unexpected heel turns and a bunch else to savor. Number 22, Randy Savage versus Ric Flair at WrestleMania 8. In the build-up to WrestleMania 5, Randy Savage went absolutely ballistic when he suspected that Hulk Hogan had an ulterior motive when it came to Miss Elizabeth. In the run-up to WrestleMania 8, Ric Flair played with fire by taunting the Macho Man about his alleged prior relationship with Savage's wife, claiming that she was mine before she was yours, and labeling her damaged goods. Needless to say, old hot-headed Randy wanted to kill the Nature Boy and take his WWE title. Both Flair and Savage have their own distinct style, and they meshed beautifully on the grandest stage in what was, incredibly, the first singles match they ever had, and only the third time they'd really shared a ring outside of the 1992 Royal Rumble and a tag match at a house show. The two of them just going out and wrestling for 20 minutes would have been enjoyable enough, but since this is WrestleMania, there was a little extra pizzazz due to the involvement of Mr. Perfect and Liz. A great WWE title grudge match between two genuine icons of the industry. Number 21, Chris Jericho versus The Rock at No Mercy 2001. By this point, the invasion angle was circling the drain, and WWE had given up the ghost when it came to trying to keep the whole Alliance versus WWE thing a cohesive storyline. WWE guys wrestled against WWE guys, Alliance guys wrestled against Alliance guys, and people switched allegiance on a weekly basis. It was maddening, but a positive consequence was that it gave us The Rock and Chris Jericho's WCW title match at No Mercy. The most electrifying man in sports entertainment and the Ayatollah of rock and roller made you forget about what a washout the potential biggest money angle in wrestling was turning into by putting on a wildly entertaining match that was one of WWE's best matches of a very good year as far as in-ring goes. It's The Rock and Chris Jericho on pay-per-view with a major title at stake, so you know what to expect, but they managed to exceed even the lofty hopes put on them, sowing the seeds for Y2J's heel turn and undisputed title win a couple of months later in the process. Number 20, AJ Styles vs John Cena at Royal Rumble 2017. For people watching the simultaneous rise of John Cena in WWE and AJ Styles in TNA, the thought of them meeting in a ring seemed almost impossible. The phenomenal one was too small for WWE, and there was no way Vince's franchise guy would ever find himself making an entrance in the Impact Zone. By 2016, however, things had changed sufficiently to where Styles was on his way into WWE as Cena was still one of the main men but had become a more part-time performer. Their summer series, including matches at Money in the Bank and SummerSlam, was great, but they somehow went one better with their WWE title bout at the 2017 Royal Rumble. This was the best of both men, a rollicking 25 minutes that had everyone guessing with some incredible near falls. It tipped in favor of Cena, netting him his record-tying 16th world title. Number 19, Trish Stratus vs Mickie James at WrestleMania 22. At WrestleMania 22 in 2006, Trish Stratus and Mickie James had a women's title match that not only wasn't a simple 5-minute afterthought, but a conclusion to a storyline that had been developing over the course of 6 months. Trish and Mickie's single white female-inspired story had gotten more attention than any other between two female WWE performers in an age, and really, that's what made their match so special. Because while the bulk of the action was good, some of it was a bit sloppy, including the messed up ending. But that's not what fans will remember it for. They will remember it for the crowd heat it generated, the way the characters played off each other, and how the way the match went really did fit into how the storyline had played out. Both women have had better matches in their careers, yes, but few as symbolic, meaningful, or important. Number 18, Kurt Angle vs Chris Benoit at Royal Rumble 2003. Call it sports entertainment all you want, but the word on the marquee is wrestling, and two men who did that better than just about anyone were Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit. The Rabid Wolverine and the Olympic hero had met countless times before they locked up at the 2003 Royal Rumble, but their WWE title match that night in Boston was their best as opponents. This was a tale of two unparalleled technicians piecing together the proverbial human chess match as they sought to outmaneuver the other, which led to an abundance of ultra-crisp counter-wrestling. There was no shortage of suplexes or submission attempts, as you would expect, and the pace never let up, leading to an intricate but by no means convoluted closing stretch. Refreshingly, after such a close and hard-fought match, Angle retained without resorting to underhanded methods, shaking off several crossface attempts to finally cinch in the ankle lock and force the crippler to tap. Benoit lost on the night, but his performance earned him a rare standing ovation when he got to his feet. Number 17, The Shield vs Ryback and Team Hell No at TLC 2012. The Shield made an instant impact in WWE with their debut at Survivor Series 2012 and subsequent weeks of wreaking havoc on WWE television. But the first real test would be their in-ring debut as a unit, which took place at the TLC pay-per-view. Put in with babyface trio Ryback and Team Hell No in a 6-man tables, ladders and chairs match, Rollins, Reigns and Ambrose took full advantage of the opportunity opportunity and got their run off to the strongest start possible. It was non-stop, barely controlled chaos for close to 25 minutes. Crucially, it told a great story too, and everyone got their chance to shine amid the weapon shots, big bumps, and stunts. Even the big guy, who has become a figure of derision in recent years, was in fine form here. A total show stealer, this was never boring and announced the arrival of the Shield in a major way, making everyone believers in the Hounds of Justice. Number 16, Goldberg vs. Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 33. At WrestleMania 20, Brock Lesnar and Goldberg were booed out of Madison Square Garden by an unruly crowd who resented the fact that both men were on their way out of the company immediately after. It was a disaster, turning the would-be dream match into a total nightmare. Was funny to watch at the time, mind. Luckily for Big Bill and the Beast Incarnate, they got the opportunity to do it over 13 years later with far better results. Rather than the protracted, disinterested stallfest they had done all those years earlier, Brock and Goldberg flew right out of the gate and went hell for leather from the opening bell. Less a wrestling match than one of those monster movies like Godzilla vs. King Kong, this Clash of the Titans had the 75,000 watching in the arena going banana. Get it? For everything they did. Which goes to show that in wrestling, it's not what you do or how much of it you do, but how you do it, where and why. Because this match lasted less than 5 minutes and felt utterly satisfying when it was over. Like a good shag. Number 15, Shawn Michaels vs. Mankind at In Your House Mind Games. Even just from an immediate visual standpoint, Mankind vs. Shawn Michaels told an interesting story. On one side, you've got the in-shape pretty boy babyface champion. On the other, the sadistic masked baddie with a menacing aura of danger permeating his every move. In the ring, their two styles couldn't have been more different, but they also couldn't have clicked any better, with both Michaels and Foley's willingness to push their bodies to the limit enabling a genuine classic. Shawn was in his true physical prime here, and Mick was eager to impress in his first WWE pay-per-view main event, so they held nothing back when it came to the punishment they put themselves through. Not that it's just a bump fest or anything like that though. On the contrary, there was plenty of psychology and character work, and they told an engrossing story over the course of 26 brilliantly booked minutes. One thing that irked people at the time was the lack of a decisive finish, but the post-match scene involving Vader, Sid and The Undertaker does end things on an exciting note. Number 14, Bret Hart vs. Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 8. One of the hardest matches to make truly interesting is babyface versus babyface, as with nobody to really boo, fans can find it hard to get invested in the action. Leave it to two wrestling geniuses like Bret Hart and Roddy Piper then to figure out how to do it right, as their all-babyface encounter at WrestleMania 8 is perhaps the best example of its type. Despite them both being perceived as good guys, neither man pandered or tried to act the hero, and their match was as stiff as anything from that time. Hot Rod even tried to capitalize when Bret got split open by biting the wound, which incidentally had been done covertly as WWE had a staunch no-blood policy at the time. Flair tried the same later on in his match with Savage, but he was found out and duly fined. This one gets forgotten about by some because Bret was such a machine and had an endless parade of classics in those days, but it's certainly one of Piper's better matches and a classic piece of storytelling filled with tight work and fascinating psychology. Capping it off was Rowdy Roddy doing an almost unheard of clean job for the Hitman while dropping the Intercontinental title to him. Respect. Number 13, Mike Awesome vs. Masato Tanaka at ECW One Night Stand 2005. WWE decided to revive ECW 4.5 years after it had kicked the bucket with One Night Stand 2005, a nostalgia-filled love letter to Paul Heyman's revolutionary promotion. The entire show, from presentation and matches to booking, was pitched just right, but one bout well and truly took home Match of the Night honors. And it didn't feature a single contracted WWE performer, but rather two ECW originals with a point to prove. Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka, who had put on some of the most incredible matches in ECW history, ran it back one last time and it was, well, in a word, awesome. Mike had a point to prove, not only to the ECW faithful who resented him from walking out of the promotion and joining rival WCW while reigning as ECW champion, but WWE wrestlers and fans who had seen him far from his best during the invasion. This was wood-breaking, brain cell scrambling anarchy that just escalated and escalated, and while much of what they did shouldn't be copied for anyone who's looking to have a long career, you cannot fault the endeavor. Number 12, The Rock vs. Steve Austin at WrestleMania X7. Certain rivalries can come to define eras, and The Rock vs. Steve Austin was the definitive feud of the Attitude Era. The Texas Rattlesnake and Brahma Bull headlined 2 WrestleManias during that period, including a third during the Ruthless Aggression Era, and good as all 3 of their Mania matches were, it's the middle match in the trilogy that lives longest in the memory. The story to it was simple but effective. Both men wanted to be WWE champion, and neither man could imagine not holding the title. Austin was not long back from major neck surgery and was looking to reclaim his crown in front of a massive Texas crowd, while Rock was eager to hold onto the throne, having usurped Stone Cold's position in his absence. Set up exquisitely with that Limp Bizkit My Way video package, anticipation was through the roof for the match, which was everything fans could have asked for and more. Just 2 ass kickers going all out in the biggest match on the grandest stage. Austin's surprise heel turn was ill-advised, yes, but it doesn't take anything away from this masterpiece. Number 11, John Cena vs. CM Punk on Raw. The final match between 2 great rivals, John Cena and CM Punk's main event from the February 25th, 2013 episode of Raw, took some people by surprise with just how good it was, but it really shouldn't have. Punk and Cena were gold whenever they stepped in the ring with each other, and in the Raw main event and with a shot against WWE champion The Rock at WrestleMania on the line, they weren't about to phone it in. The key to what made this so good and different from their other encounters was that they had us believing in an outcome other than the one that everyone watching had assumed was a foregone conclusion. It was a WrestleMania caliber match on free television and honestly blew the eventual Rock vs. Cena match out of the water. They were even able to catch the announcers off guard when Punk hit Cena with a pile driver, a move that had been outlawed for an age, in a gripping false finish. Punk himself has cited this as the match that he's most proud of from his career because he was deathly ill with the flu at the time, and he and Cena went 30 minutes without calling anything besides the pile driver beforehand. Now that's what I call the art of wrestling. Number 10, Randy Savage vs. Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. Routinely name-checked as the match that convinced many future stars to get into the business, Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage's Intercontinental title match from WrestleMania 3 is still held in the highest esteem today. Hogan and Andre may have drawn the house that day, but the Dragon and the Macho Man stole the show with a cutting-edge piece of work that was wrestled at a much quicker pace than what was standard at the time and featured countless near falls from the beginning. As noted earlier, Savage was a stickler for detail and he mapped out the match to Steamboat well in advance, the two memorizing their moves and sequences to the point that it was locked in their brains. It's obviously not all about arm drags and knife-edge chops, mind. It's about the story they tell and the feeling they create and how they're able to control the emotions of such a large crowd, leading to the payoff everyone was hoping to see. It of course helped that they had such a compelling angle going into it, with the Dragon seeking revenge after having his throat crushed and the match being his last shot at the title. There's something timeless about all of it, from the execution of the in-ring action, to the setting, to even the simple but brilliant gear both men wore for combat. Number 9, the 6-man Hell in a Cell at Armageddon 2000. Look at the star power here, my word. 5 of the all-time greats. And Rikishi. Kidding, Big Quiche, don't stink face me. WWE had an embarrassment of riches when it came to top-level talent at the tail end of 2000 and decided to stick 6 of them in one match inside Hell in a Cell no less for their final pay-per-view of the year, the aptly titled Armageddon. The sextet of Attitude Era legends had all been involved with each other in some way, shape or form for the last several months, and everything came to a head with Kurt Angle's WWE title on the line. The story threads intersected in interesting ways in the cell, as one after another the combatants got bloodied and bruised. Partway through, Vince McMahon and his stooges attempted to stop the madness, but only made things worse after ripping the door off its hinges. Rikishi was the unwitting victim of this well-intentioned act, as his 400+ pound frame ended up sailing off the side of the steel structure onto a flatbed truck below. That was the highlight reel moment of the match, but the whole thing is great and a good example of why this particular era is looked back on so fondly. Number 8, Shawn Michaels vs. Ric Flair at WrestleMania 24. If you could write a way to wrap up your legendary career after 4 decades in the ring, you would struggle to do much better than having a classic match with another fellow great at WrestleMania. Ric Flair got the red carpet treatment for his farewell, inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame the night before meeting Shawn Michaels at the granddaddy of them all. Speaking of granddaddies, Slick Rick was getting on at this point and wasn't the world beater he once was, but if anyone was going to get a worthy effort out of him, it was HBK. It was suitably epic given the stage and the stakes involved. As per the storyline, Flair essentially had to wrestle every match as though it was his last, as Mr. McMahon had decreed that the next time he lost he would have to retire. There was a strong sense that WrestleMania 24 would be the end, but the two veterans kept fans guessing with near falls and ramped up the drama as the match wore on. Shawn pulled out several rarely seen tricks like a springboard moonsault through the announce table, while Flair got to play his greatest hits and even successfully hit a move off the top rope after 1,000 attempts before his spiritual successor Old yelled at him with sweet chin music. I'm sorry, I love this match, and so will you. Number 7, Randy Orton vs. Mick Foley at Backlash 2004. Randy Orton was bred to be a WWE superstar, but it wasn't until his program and eventual singles match with Mick Foley that people began to fully grasp his immeasurable potential. The Legend Killer had targeted the hardcore legend, forcing him out of retirement for a street fight at Backlash 2004. Orton had, to that point, been considered something of a pampered pretty boy, talented but one of the hand-picked prospects from WWE's developmental territory who could go either way depending on how he progressed and matured. Fans really started to appreciate Randy a whole lot more after he and Foley brutalized each other in their violent Intercontinental title scrap. It was a star-making night for Orton, who took his lumps by being thrown off the stage, taking a bump on drawing pins, and having other nasty things done to his chiseled body. Foley, as ever, was game to maim himself and did everything within his power to get himself, his opponent, and the match over. They didn't go too far with the gore either and managed to blow off their feud while simultaneously leaving fans wanting more. After this display of fortitude, it wasn't long before Orton was a fully fledged babyface after capturing his first world title. Number 6, Brock Lesnar vs. Seth Rollins vs. John Cena at Royal Rumble 2015. The 2015 Royal Rumble pay-per-view was notoriously naff, with fans vehemently turning on the show at the end when Roman Reigns won the Rumble match. If WWE had switched the Rumble around with the WWE title triple threat between Brock Lesnar, John Cena, and Seth Rollins, they might have went off the air in happier circumstances. Because the three men had a slobber knocker for the ages that had all the car crash style action you would want, while also being as smartly booked as any match in recent memory. Everyone got the opportunity to look good, with the Architect proving that he could hang out on the main stage by keeping up with his esteemed opponents. The Beast Incarnate was in the mood to sweat for his big fat paycheck, while Cena was his old reliable self. The chemistry and timing were there for all to see, and the match was laid out in a way that it gave fans something they had never quite seen before. One of the best WWE title matches of the past decade for sure. Number 5, The Undertaker vs. Mankind at King of the Ring 1998. One of the most famous professional wrestling matches of all time, Mankind and Undertaker's Hell in a Cell outing from the 1998 King of the Ring retains its glow almost a quarter of a century later. Even if you haven't seen the full match, you have seen the two big falls that Foley took off the side and through the top of the cage. In an era filled with wild bumps and crazy stunts, they stuck out as exceptional and will rightfully be on WWE's highlight reels until the end of time. But Foley suffered beyond those quite frankly terrifying falls, and Taker, though he didn't go all Evel Knievel himself, also deserves credit for working the match on a messed up ankle. But really, this is the match that turned Foley from WWE star to legend in the minds of many. After the big bumps, there's still a lot of match left, and it's simply incredible that Mrs. Foley's baby boy was able to go on and take yet more abuse. Did his escapades raise the bar too high for those seeking infamy going forward? Perhaps, but it has more than stood the test of time and remains one of the darndest things this presenter has ever seen. Number 4, Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar on SmackDown. Look, if I'm going to watch two people wrestle for an entire gosh darned hour, I want them to be an Olympic gold medalist and a future UFC heavyweight champion. Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle settled their WWE title rivalry on the September 18th, 2003 episode of SmackDown in a rare 60-minute Iron Man match that featured a little bit of everything, not just the requisite textbook technical wrestling. There was brawling, psychology, big moves, and they really told a great story in a match type that can be hard to do well. You expect two well-conditioned studs like Lesnar and Angle not to tire, but they really put in a shift here and had an Iron Man match unlike any other. There have been some really great one-hour Iron Man matches before, namely the ones between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and The Rock and Triple H, but this one, for my money, is the pick of the bunch, and if you're going to watch just one WWE Iron Man match in your life, it should be Brock and Kurt's. It's not flawless, but it's not very often you get to see two generational athletes in their prime go at it in these circumstances. Number 3, the two-man power trip versus Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit on Raw. Short-lived though they were, the two-man power trip of Steve Austin and Triple H were a force to be reckoned with in the spring of 2001, at one point holding the World, Intercontinental and Tag Team titles at the same time. The night after Hunter dropped the IC strap to Kane, he and Stone Cold put their tag team titles on the line against Chris's Benoit and Jericho in the main event of Raw. It was rare to see the tag belts put in such a prominent position on WWE's flagship show, with WWE giving the four men ample time to do their magic. And magic is just what we got, as the two teams turned in one of the best Raw matches ever. A throwback to great tag team matches of the past, they didn't need wacky gimmicks or crazy stipulations to tell their story, which was simple yet effective. The heels were tenacious and used underhanded tactics while cutting their fiery opponents off, building anticipation for the eventual hot tag. The two biggest stars bumped their behinds off for the perceived underdogs, and the game proved his mettle by finishing the match despite tearing his quad off the bone. Barnstorming stuff from the beginning to the end. Number 2, Shawn Michaels vs Bret Hart at Survivor Series 1997. Where the previous match will go down in history for Triple H's ability to gut it out despite being in excruciating pain, this one will forever be remembered for being the scene of the Montreal Screwjob. And like the previous match, that is a bit of a shame because everything up until the finish was pretty damn good. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart had wrestled several technically superior matches in the past, including a 60-minute Iron Man match in the main event of WrestleMania 12, but their Survivor Series 97 headliner was something different altogether. A lot had happened in the time between the two matches, as the personal relationship between them had deteriorated considerably. Rather than exchange holds on the mat, this was a straight-up hockey fight, with barely a wrestling move used. They beat the dog out of each other in convincing fashion in front of a sizzling hot crowd. Yes, you've seen the finish and heard 25 years of speculation, commentary, and conspiracy theory, but you ought to give the match itself at least one spin if you haven't already. Number 1, The Rock vs Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18. A match that had seemed unfathomable at one point, The Rock vs Hulk Hogan was the dream match as far as many wrestling fans were concerned. A match befitting a stadium setting, the Great One vs the Hulkster was fantasy warfare made real, with the face of WWE's past meeting the face of the present in front of almost 70,000 rowdy fans. It wasn't the main event in the sense that it didn't go on last, but it was by far the main attraction, and the reaction of the Toronto audience made that plainly obvious. In an interesting twist, the fans gave supposed heel Hogan a hero's welcome and forced him and Rock to switch things up on the fly, recrafting things based on feel and listening to what the crowd wanted them to do. The WWE audience hadn't watched Hulk wrestle on a WWE pay-per-view in 9 years, and they simply didn't want to see their childhood favourite be the bad guy. Was it a technical marvel? Of course not, far from it. But if you want to see a show of star power where two megastars work an audience experience like a fiddle, getting the absolute maximum out of every move, sequence, and facial expression, then this is it, brother! And there we are, 101 WWE matches you should watch at least once. I am knackered. Time for a serious cup of mud.